I'd like to welcome Casey Orr to Artist Tales. She's an American portrait photographer based in the UK. Her work centers on identity, community, fashion, and youth culture. Best known for her project Saturday Town, she creates pop-up portrait studios on the high streets, inviting collaboration and celebrating individuality. Welcome, Casey.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you on the podcast.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Well, yeah, I'm excited having you as well. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got into photography and particularly kind of capturing youth culture.
Well, I picked up a camera when I was 15 in my art class, and basically it just really spoke to me, the idea of documenting the world with a camera. It's been a way that has kept me kind of present, and I feel like I'm very grounded when I'm with my camera. I have to pay attention. So I find it it's just has been my kind of mode of expression and of exploring the world since then. It's never really wavered. And I when I wonder about things, I think when I wonder through exploring it through photographic portraiture, really. So if I'll wonder about, a subject matter, I'll kind of think about photographing people and having that be a way that I can find out things about the world. It was around 2012, and I started seeing young women in Leeds who had kind of big hair and hair pieces and wigs wearing. And I was thinking, what are they doing? What is this fashion, this kind of big hair fashion that looked very much like it was a throwback to kind of something from the 1960s, or these kind of beehive hairdos. And I just thought, what does that mean, what they're doing? What does it mean? And I decided, well, I want to find out. I want to photograph them and find out and talk to them about what it is that they're doing with their kind of hairstyles and fashion. This became what was Saturday Girl. Saturday Girl came before Saturday Town. And I spent a year photographing young women in Leeds on Saturdays. I wanted it to be about how a young woman would be out and about on autonomous kind of moment when you're away from maybe school and work and family, and you're kind of out in town. This idea of how do you want to present yourself, and what does that mean for you, how you identify? So I thought Saturday afternoons were the best time when you'd be this you'd have some kind of freedom of autonomy that you could be out and about. I wanted to photograph that, and I wanted to photograph it through kind of style and fashion and presentation. So I decided that I would set up a pop-up portrait studio and just go out and about and see who was out and see what people were looking like, and invite people to come and be photographed. So the project started like that, and it is documentary photography. It is street photography, but it doesn't have those aesthetics. So it's very much about who's out, what are people looking like, but I wanted it to have this more stylized look to it. I wanted it to have that feel of looking like fashion photography. So I thought, and also, of course, in the UK weather, you just never know what you're going to get. It's so I thought, how does this become a series? How did the pictures make sense from one week to another? And so this pop-up portrait studio became the idea around Saturday Girl. And that then continued. So I did that work for almost a year. And I thought, oh, wow, I've really found out so much. I've talked to young women about their hair and a way that they want to present themselves. This really intimate kind of connection between myself and them in the portrait studio. I had an exhibition where these original photographs in Leeds they were blown up really big. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. I'm going to move on now to whatever my next project might be. But then what happened was I did the project. I was invited to go to Liverpool as part of the Look Photography Festival, as it was then, and do the project there. And when I photographed in Liverpool, Saturday Girls is how I was thinking about it at the time. I realized that there in Liverpool, they were doing something different than the young women in Leeds. And that in Liverpool, there was a dialect to the visual language of presentation and fashion. And I just thought that is fascinating. They're doing something different in Liverpool. For instance, their girls do go out on a Saturday afternoon with curlers in their hair. Like in Liverpool, everything is just like turned up to 11. The idea that you'd be out curlers in your hair is you're saying like, I've got plans tonight. I'm going out tonight, you know? And it's so playful and so like super colorful there. And I just thought, why are they kind of like even more visually, you know, big in their presentation than in Leeds? I started thinking about like what happens to people who live in a port city. How are you, you know, Liverpool is a port. It's very much like a city that where you're communicating with people who aren't of your culture. Like, what does that, you know, what does that mean to how that you'd have a visual language of style? And why would it be different in Liverpool and Leeds? Why is there a dialect style? So I thought from then, okay, well, I need to go everywhere in the UK and find out. This was the beginning of the project. And up until really the pandemic, I traveled the UK with the portrait studio, photographing young women on Saturday afternoons. Now, as that project evolved and moved, it started to have a conversation with it was already having this conversation, but I started to just really understand that this conversation was evolving, as was identity. And there came a time around 2015, 2016, where more people identifying as male were coming into the studio. There was this idea that maybe the binaries of what were, you know, girl, boy, male, female, they started to fall apart. And this became a part of what the Saturday Girl studio was documenting. And I just thought it was an incredible time to be out on the street photographing. And so what happened? Anyway, so I keep on thinking I'm done this project, and it just keeps going on because youth culture and young people, they just continue to evolve and to like offer something different. And identity is like wildly different than it was when I started the project. The project is now Saturday Town, and it is about, I needed to kind of remove that word girl. It became like, so, you know, it just is a loaded word. The project is now about all kinds of different identities. And of course, like some people, they may have come into my studio at a time when they identified as girl or a female, or that might have felt right. And that as they evolve and change, that their identity changes. And I just was kind of coming up against that, like not wanting anybody to feel pinned down by a gendered word. So I'm still doing this project, and I learned so much from it. And it's now Saturday Town, and it's kind of there for everybody.
That sounds really fascinating. And, you know, probably a few things, you know, strike me, but the one thing that does strike me is, and probably not surprisingly, you're probably capturing the fluidity of not just identity, style, who people are can evolve over time, but society can evolve over time. Now, it's kind of a segment of society, you know, of younger people, and we probably see changes in identity or, you know, evolutions of identity probably more strikingly in young people than perhaps older people, by and large. And I don't want to sort of say that categorically for everyone because everyone's an individual, but I guess it's kind of that, how did you navigate that collaborative working? How did you kind of approach people? Because I'm just thinking particularly when you're first starting out, projects probably not that well known. You know, how did you kind of get people to sit for you?
Yeah, I think that's like the big question in my life, you know, like how can I get somebody to allow me to see them, to kind of connect with me for a moment, to be photographed. And so I really think about what my presentation is and who am I in the world, and how can I be a person how can I let them know that that somebody could trust me? It's a thing that I'm constantly, like every time I feel like I'm super aware, but maybe also as a woman, I'm just really aware of like, what am I kind of saying visually about myself, and how do I become, you know, approachable and trustable? But I also, I've always used I use cards, like invitation cards. I always have cards with me that explain who I am, explain the project, and they have information so that people are able to find out more about the project and about me. So that's really like key to the project, that I'm out on the street, but I'm not just approaching people. I'm kind of inviting them with these cards. And then I think the other thing that is that the studio is a space where if you step into that to be photographed, you're choosing to do that. So like you've been invited, and if you choose to do that, you're actually physically walking into that like space that I try and make safe and magical and beautiful. But it's very much the autonomy of like, I'm not stopping people on the street with my camera. I'm not photographing people, from that vantage point. I'm very much like, it's very much an invitation. And I think that to me is really important, that there's like, I've invited you, but you can say no. Do you know what I mean? Like if you choose to do that, you are, you're choosing that.
And that to me sounds quite important, because I'm conscious that you're dealing is probably not the right word, but you're working with younger people. And, I'm kind of conscious of what's happening in the world and some of the news that's happening. And, I can quite understandably kind of suspicions about strangers approaching vulnerable or young or vulnerable people. And I'm also conscious about consent, particularly around pictures or recording or that sort of thing. So how do you actually navigate that? Because I'm also conscious you're putting on exhibitions of, your images.
Yeah, it's such a difficult like minefield, gray area. I mean, and also the way that I communicate with people, it's constantly changing. So, so what I do now is I have model release forms. I have paper ones. The other thing is I've tried model release forms on a digital pad, trying to make it like easier for myself. I don't know, all these different digital ways of consent, but I've found that archivally, paper model release forms and get people to read them and sign them, give me an email address that I can then send them a copy of the photograph. I always send everybody a copy, and I tell people like, if you're underage, show this to your parent. And then I send them the email, I email them the photograph, but I often don't hear back from people. I just have to so often I just have to trust my gut. And I have to, if people ask me to not show their picture, I don't show their picture. But I've gotten it wrong, and people have been included in things that they then don't want to be included in. And so it's just this constant, situation where I'm just trying to do right by people. But I photograph so many people. Yeah, it's just constantly like evolving. But, and I think, there's I think people are just so used to working in this kind of like flow of visual imagery of themselves as like visual people in their stream of, public facing social media and like visibility. I want to have those conversations with people, but it's often like it's just moves so fast. So yeah, so it's just, yeah, I guess my answer to that is I'm always trying to do the right thing, and I'm never sure, like nothing is kind of solid with it. So yeah, it kind of feels like part of the project is also this, like, how do you continue to connect with people, and how do you communicate with people? And, the other thing is like, I could photograph somebody who's 15, and I can send a copy of their photograph to their, school email address and say, show your parent. But then they could be in an exhibition 2 or 3 years later. And like, how do I make sure that that there's still that kind of level of consent? It's, it's always something I'm grappling with.
It sounds like a challenge, to be fair, but I'm sure you're navigating it at least as best as you can, and quite well, to be fair. Another thing you touched on was social media. And I guess the thing I'm thinking of is kind of the impact of social media, and increasingly people are kind of, photographing themselves or live streaming, or there's video of themselves and sharing that. And I'm thinking, even 10, 20, 30 years ago, that wouldn't have been a thing. So am I right to kind of sense that that potentially has an impact on how people see consent, or interact with you to try to get their consent or their parents' consent?
Yeah, I think when the project started, that was, it was a very different world that we were living in. And I think that me just kind of having this portrait studio where I'm inviting people to come in and be photographed and to talk to me and to kind of go, okay, this is different from that. This is a kind of different thing. So you welcome to this space. Let's like slow things down for a minute and let's talk. And I find that it like it's like a really welcome, like they really get it. They're like, oh, this is different from this thing where we're constantly photographing one another. And I think there's a kind of reverence to the level of like the equipment I use. Do you know what I mean? Like, so using like actual cameras and using lights and stuff like that, it's kind of signaling like, okay, we're doing something different. Things are slowed down, and they generally like, yeah, they do get that. But I guess, yeah, I mean, once you have an image out there, and it's out there. So, and that's something that they need to kind of like navigate much younger than probably they are by the time I photograph them. But yeah, I'm not sure how to end that, because I think that so much about what I do is it's always changing. And it's, identity is constantly evolving and changing, as is the way that photography works and the function of photography and the platforms that photography kind of engages with. It's this constantly changing, evolving thing. Yeah, I mean, who knows if there's like a tipping point that's coming at some time soon with all that.
I guess time will tell. Yeah, I think it's probably at this stage a bit hard to say. I mean, 10 years ago, it would have been, we're probably in the early stages of social media, and we wouldn't have known where it sort of has taken us.
Yeah.
Today. I wanted to ask you about when you are exhibiting the pictures, kind of reactions, both from the people you're taking pictures of, if they come and look at or come to the exhibitions and look at the images, but also from society at large, like if other people coming in who perhaps haven't been involved or included in this project or your collaborative work.
Well, I think that so I want to take pictures that make people feel celebrated and seen. I want them to feel wildly, colorfully visible in a way that feels good to them. And I think that comes across in the images. And I know that for me to kind of say to a young person, I see you and I think you're amazing. And, it could be like, I see you and I see I really see your gender identity. I see I see who you are in the world. And if that can come through in an image, it can be like this moment, like a beginning of an empowering, moment that can lead to other things, other kind of levels of kind of feeling empowered to make other decisions in your life. Like, I really do think it can be incredibly powerful for somebody to feel seen and celebrated. So there is that. And then I think that to see the collection. So the collection is at the moment, when I'm showing the work in Coventry at the Herbert Museum. That's opening up in the beginning of March. But that collection is 95 photographs from the time of that I've been photographing young people. And I think the breadth of identity and the kind of playful, powerful, fashions and youth culture that comes through is much broader and much more kind of beautiful and inclusive than a lot of people realize, because we're maybe only given a certain amount of information through advertising and through things that we see, but we're actually like this beautiful breadth of wild imagination that can be seen through the way that people are presenting themselves. And I think that can be very uplifting. And I do think that now in this moment, to make art that feels like maybe it could bring joy and creativity is just incredibly important. That in itself, I think, and to create these situations. Oftentimes now I'm collaborating in the spaces that that I work in. There'll be workshops and there'll be opportunities for young people to get involved in the studio, and sometimes publications that young people, they can write for them, the publications that I do, and all these different opportunities. And yeah, like collaboration is really important to the work, and just to kind of give voice and visibility to the people I work with. And I do think that now just that can be in itself like a positive experience, and that is like essential right now.
And with the work you're doing, both with the exhibitions and, taking pictures, but also the work you're doing with younger people, does that kind of spark conversations? And if so, what kind of conversations or themes are coming up?
So it's interesting because I've been doing it for so long that I'm looking at how young people are presenting themselves, and I'm kind of like, I have to just trying to read what is happening, what's going on, and how it's changing from maybe it was last year or the year before. Of course, we had the pandemic, and there was loads of kind of changes that like came from that like incredibly loaded time. But yeah, I feel like I can see things where I think, okay, I can see this sense of like, what's a 14, 15-year-old? What are they kind of showing me now that's different than a couple years ago? I feel like I can see, and for me, that's telling me like, where are we going? Where are we going? What are the values? What are the values of young people at the moment? Where is this heading for us? And one thing that is really visible all across the board is I see people who are interested in like non-institutional forms of like belief systems, of spirituality, of like pre-Christian like understandings of belonging. I see that a lot. So I see things that are like, witchy things, or like interest in like ancient civilizations and how that might come through in your fashion. Lots of like, crystals and spiritual symbols, but people identifying as witches, which is basically which is a care for nature, I think, and a kind of non-patriarchal belonging. And queer identities are so incredibly, wildly, hilariously inclusive and expansive, and that is just, like a wonderful thing to kind of be a part of. I think that there's always been this, I think, connection to animals, to the power of animals. This could be through like wearing fur. It could be through like identifying with, certain animal characteristics, through makeup, through like accessories. But even the kind of always like wearing of a kind of a fake fur, or fur, kind of leopard skin. There's this kind of borrowing of animal powers. But that has always happened. So it's interesting. It's an interesting language to like be a part of, to read. And it also like keeps me so that if I'm going to document what's going on for young people through fashion, I need to just be like really curious, because it's constantly changing. So that's a nice place for me to be. I'm 57, and I love feeling just like, I don't know. I'm curious, and I'm here to document it, but I'm kind of, in service to like documenting what's happening, which is like such a nice it feels like an open-hearted way to live, instead of like some kind of certainty. I don't feel certain. I feel very optimistic about young people. And this is, I get this from me and my camera, like running around, the north of England at the moment, photographing young people.
And as you're talking, I'm also thinking, or I'm also reflecting on, perhaps the reflection is a better word than thinking, that without the curiosity, without the listening, without the inquisitive side of things, I do wonder whether this project would work, or even whether this project would be completely different.
Yeah, I think that they could smell, I think they would be able to smell it out if I wasn't authentic. You know what I mean? And I don't know how long, I think, wow, will they relate to me and trust me? Like, will they always do that? I think they know, like a lot of it, like who I'm really drawn to are all the queer kids and all the kind of like total wild identities in the LGBTQAI plus world. And I think that I just like, I see them as my tribe, these like, and they know it, and they know I am one of them. And no, even though I'm so much older, they can just, they can tell. And I just like love that so much. But I'm also like, I'm pretty open to them at some point being like, okay, we're done with you. Whatever, I mean, that's just like the way of the world. But I don't know. It's just like, I just delight in so many young people who I meet. I just think, and they can tell. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like moved into a feeling of, it's kind of like I'm in service to this thing, and this thing where I'm making visible people who they need to feel empowered and visible, and they also need to see one another. And that is like forms networks. It forms like communities. Like I feel like I'm playing a small part in what is a world that's like turning more beautiful. Not, we're in this like crazy time right now, but I just think that beautiful creativity is going to win in the end.
And I think the whole point about visibility is quite important. I was going to say strong, but I think important is probably a better word, because I think if you don't see yourself, then it can be quite lonely and isolating.
It is so incredibly essential that you can see something that feels like you resonate with that. It is so incredibly important. So I used to kind of think like it is a rite of passage that in Britain, especially in the northern cities, there's on a Saturday afternoon, you're like free from your institutions, your families, your school, to go out into town, into the city centers and the shopping areas, and promenade around and try out like who you want to be. That is part of a coming of age moment. And I can remember doing it when I was growing up in where I lived, in a suburban place that was probably more conservative than a lot of places. But you go out and you like use that visual language to try and like, hey, how does this feel? Or like, who am I connecting with? Do they have those visual signifiers that mean that we could be in community together? Is that like my friend or whatever? And that what happened in the pandemic, that those places were gone, and that freedom was gone, and that everything was shut, and that everybody was, stuck in their rooms. And I really felt absolutely shocked, because of course, nobody saw that coming, but I really felt like it's an important space of freedom, a Saturday afternoon. It represents a space of freedom. It represents a time of like finding out and like finding your people. And then at that time for me, I thought, okay, I'm ditching everything so that I can be out on the street when these young people come out. This is like a hugely like pivotal moment. And what was happening in that time is that young people were then finding that connection in that community through social media, through Instagram and TikTok. And they, became even, I think, more wild and creative, because they were connecting with people who weren't in their local society. They were able to like really push the boat out and find people like online who were, like much more niche than maybe they ever knew, or maybe my generation would have ever known. So that was, when they came back out on the street, when young people were able to be in the street, they were there. They were there, their towns were often shut. They're often like places that have generational like decline within society, within communities, within towns, a lot of the towns in the North where I work. But these young, like creative people were out anyway, like looking cool and fun, and, just out. Like the resilience of that is just so inspiring. I think through, through really hard times, I'm so inspired by young people and their creativity. And I just feel like what I'm doing is in service to like, to where we're going in they're our future. And that's what I just feel like a very kind of, it's just a kind of like a very hopeful and humble role in it. And plus, like, I'm just having it's just so much fun.
And it sounds like you're having a lot of fun. And I was going to say, too, as you were talking there, what I heard, kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, you're seeing them. And I think you're seeing them as young, the young people in society for who they are. And I think that in itself is really quite powerful, because you're at an age where you kind of want to be seen, you want to be seen in a positive way. And you seem to be doing that, which is quite a powerful thing.
Yeah, I think because it's kind of it's the main part of what I do in my work life. So I just feel very comfortable with like approaching young people and just be like, oh my God, that's so cool. What are you doing? What is this thing? And generally they just know I mean it. And then I'm not like their teacher or whatever. I just really do mean it. And they just can tell. But whether, I'm open for them to be like, all right, lady, we're done with you or whatever. If that happens, I'll like move on. But at the moment, this is, it is a very like powerful way to spend my time. And, I'm just very grateful that like this work, it continues.
My final question is, where do you see your work going? Do you think the project you're working on will kind of evolve over time? Or do you think, you might move on to other things, or are you open to whatever comes next?
Yeah, I am. So it's become more collaborative. I love to, work with, wherever I'm working with arts organizations or other artists. I love to kind of connect with what that community is doing and make my project kind of make sense with that place, with that location, with what those young people are doing. And I do a lot of stuff with LGBTQ specific youth groups. I'm doing a lot of things with looking at archives at the moment, like with youth groups, where we're using portraiture and photography, but also collage. I'm doing more like moving image, and it's just really an interesting time because I feel like I am confident and in the flow of my work. I'm up for challenging myself. But I just feel like I know what I'm doing and I know what I want to do. And there's like such a freedom in that. So, but just to be in the flow is also to be with the uncertainty of like creative process. And so I feel like, it's kind of a hot potato. You just kind of like gotta be with it in a light way. And yeah, I'm just excited for whatever is, happening next. Because I feel like I'm not just I'm evolving as an artist. I'm like finding out about the world. I'm exploring things like with my tools. It feels, when I think of like my camera, I feel like I'm talking about my sacred tools, and I'm here to kind of like document stuff and to witness. I think that's my role, to witness in different ways, and that's a humble role, to kind of like be with what's happening, not to kind of oversee it or control it, but to be just present with what's happening and to document things as best I can. So I just feel very, lucky and excited to be doing this work.
Yeah, I really like what you said there, to witness, to be, because I think often, there's pressure to keep moving and not to witness or to be, present in the moment. So if anything else, I'll certainly take that away with me. But yeah, no, thank you. It's been so interesting speaking with you about your projects. And yeah, I hope to actually see, an exhibition of some of your work, because I've looked at it online and it does look rather incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, I do have an exhibition at the Herbert Museum in Coventry that opens in March. And I'm excited to be there because I'll be working with photographing, adding to the series, photographing and working with young people in that area. And I haven't done that before in that particular place. So Yeah, that'll be really fun to see what they're doing down in Coventry.
Yeah, and I'm sure, that will be a really good exhibition. Do you have any other exhibitions planned later in the year?
Well, I'm doing some work I've got some work that I'm doing up in Cumbria. So I've been working on an ongoing series of portraits of Cumbrian LGBTQ youth. And that at the moment is being exhibited there, but there's talk about that moving on. So yeah, I tend to like do a lot of pop-up exhibitions, but I've got one that just is finishing in Stockport at the moment at Stock Room. There's just it's an ongoing kind of there's always something, but the big one right now is Coventry, and that's the kind of whole retrospective of the work. So yeah.
Well, great. Well, thank you. It's been really wonderful speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Heather. I've really enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning in to my conversation with Casey. She really does capture the vibe and energy of young people in her work. More information on Casey can be found in the show notes. In the next episode, I'll be speaking with Jo Stapleton. She uses traditional photographic methods to build constructed realities. You won't want to miss it.